Well, it's Sunday, bloody Sunday, isn't it, YouTube? Leafs, Habs in Montreal last night. Classic matchup. Leafs were back on the win column with that game against Anaheim earlier in the week, earlier in the week, the night before, on Friday night. And as the game started, I was very impressed because the Leafs showed no effects of playing the night before. They came out like it was a home game after 2 nights off. They had the energy, they had the their game plan was working perfectly, their possession game, and it was a very similar type of game that we've been seeing from them recently. Only the better periods were even better. The first and second periods for the Leafs were great. They only allowed 7 shots against in the first period, and in the second period, only 4. So Montreal was only at 11 shots through 2 periods. Unfortunately, although the Leafs were the dominant team over the first 2 periods, they couldn't crack Carey Price. So we headed to the third period with a 0-0 tie. And this has been the trend lately, is that they play great in the first 2 periods, and then in the third period they can't find a way to win the game. It looked good at first, let's say. Just over a minute in, Hyman and Kerfoot entered the Canadian zone and penetrated towards the net with a series of drop passes that ended up going to Tavares, and he just ripped one far blocker side on Price and gave the Leafs the early 1-0 lead in the third. However, we know how their third periods have been recently, and after that Tavares goal, that was the only shot they had, or the last shot they had in that period for the rest of the game. So it was just Montreal took over, and the first 2 periods of the Leafs' work was basically wiped off the slate. It was just a complete reversal, and I mean, we're used to seeing that recently, right? They play great in the first 2 periods, and then they find a way to, if they have a lead, give it up. Or if they're tied, let them go ahead and take it. They just seem to be able to get comebacks against them all the time in the third period. They can't lock it down, and that's what ended up happening. With about 2.5 minutes left, a Scandella point shot for the Habs snuck its way through Campbell's legs, I think it was. There were some bodies in front, so it was a bit of a screen and such, but it found its way in and tied the game up late at 1-1. Now Campbell, the Anaheim game I mentioned, he still gave up 4 goals on however many shots, so you couldn't get a real good gauge on just how good he was. But this game was much different. Although the Habs were limited to 11 shots over the first 2 periods, they got their lion's share in the third period, and he really held the Leafs in that third period, and fortunately they were able to at least drag it to overtime and get a point out of it. Although they should have won this game outright with how well they played over the first 2 periods. That's, again, we get to the 60 minutes thing, right? You got to play the full 60 minutes. And they didn't, and it cost them. And although they could have kind of reclaimed it in the third, or in the overtime period, they didn't. The first shot in the game they'd had since the Tavares goal early in the third period was a Tyson Barrie shot in overtime that Price took on the blocker and kind of punched out into the neutral zone, and that sent the Habs in on a breakaway. It was just like, oh god. But Campbell did a good job of poke checking. I don't know who got the breakaway, but he poke checked him and took that chance away. But then unfortunately, in the ensuing mess that happened after that, it came right out to Kovalchuk, who was flying in kind of behind the play, and then just popped that loose puck in, and that was the 2-1 loss for the Leafs in overtime against the Habs. So they haven't beat Montreal this season, which is so bizarre. But that was a big game, and they kind of let it slip away like they've done so many times recently. And with how precarious their playoff situation, and given that 2 of these games they've blown have come against teams that are right on their heels in their division in Florida and Montreal, that's even more troubling, right? So I guess the positive you can take out of it is that they did get 1 point at least, but the problem is Montreal got 2. So at least it's a point added to the total, and in a back-to-back situation, you know what, they came out and played a really good game for 2 periods, and you kind of have to take the positives for what they are, and at least they know their only weakness right now, so far that I can see, is their third periods. They obviously can play defense when they really want to, because they limited Montreal to 11 shots over the first 2 periods. You know, like it's funny that the night and day aspect this team can have to it in that defensive aspect. So there are a lot of positives to take out of the game. It's just that at this time of year, when the points are so important and the race is so tight, you don't want to be taking positives out of a loss, right? You need to be winning and taking positives out of all the winning. So yeah, it is what it is, and they'll just have to kind of hope and pray for other teams to start losing and for them to start winning. And but they control their own destiny at this point, because they're still in the playoff picture. They're still in a playoff spot, and yeah, if they just get on a roll, they'll be able to play themselves into the playoffs and keep themselves in that picture. But if they keep coughing up leads in the third period and blowing games like this, it's going to end badly. And if they get into the playoffs and they don't sort that thing out, it's just gonna, we've all remembered the Boston comebacks over the last number of years, where the Leafs seem to have had a series or a game locked up in the playoffs, and they found a way to blow it, right? And that's just, this is all just kind of, it's all the same, right? It's all these late game giveaways, and that was the thing that I did notice. Even though the Leafs played great in the first 2 periods, they gave the puck away a lot, like with these bad passes, and it's like you could see it coming from a mile, like these long passes, and it's like, oh no, don't make that pass, and then they made the pass, and it's like, oh, it was right onto the stick of a Hab, right? So they did have some problems there with giveaways, but they were able to work their way out of it. But it all caught up to them in the third, and yeah, it is what it is. Nylander was out again because he's still sick, but other than that, it was the same lineup that it was the previous game. And yeah, I totally forgot that Mikheyev is still hurt too. Like I think he was going to be, the way he was going was going to be at least in the mentioning for in the Rookie of the Year for the Calder race. But with how many games he's missed now, that's no longer going to be a thing. But I totally forgot that he's injured, as well as Riley. So those are two key cogs in their lineup, because I was really impressed with Mikheyev's season up until he got injured. You know, you throw him back into the lineup once he's back, and then Riley too, and it's I think this is a much different team from what we've been seeing over the last little while. And there's been a lot of positives over the last little while, but they all seem to be taken. It all comes out in the wash when they have these massive letdowns that kind of wipes all that good work away, right? So hopefully they can just keep plugging at it and work on this third period issue and iron it out. And then if they get these two guys back at some point, that's going to be huge. And Fred too. Hopefully Campbell can do a good job as a backup in the meantime. But once they get all these bodies back, hopefully that's going to make a huge difference. And hopefully it's sooner rather than later, because like I said, they're kind of running out of time. So, well, we'll see what happens. I'm rambling now. I do that, especially in the morning when I'm still kind of waking up and can barely form a cohesive thought. I don't know when the next game is. I think they play Arizona next sometime early this week, so we'll be back to mention that, hopefully on the good side, hopefully on a win side. And until then, have a great rest of the weekend.